Claire lived in a neighborhood where every house looked the same, with trimmed lawns and quiet streets. From the outside, her life seemed just as tidy, married to Daniel, a financial consultant who traveled often for work, living in a home that never lacked stability. But behind the doors of their carefully maintained house, Claire felt an emptiness that grew heavier with each passing month. Daniel was dependable and hardworking, but he was also distant. His phone calls during business trips were short and distracted, and when he came home, he buried himself in reports and late-night emails. Their conversations had dwindled to reminders about groceries, bills, or family gatherings, leaving Claire feeling more like a roommate than a wife. Loneliness drove her toward the glowing screen of her computer late at night. It began innocently, with scrolling through forums about books and hobbies she once loved but rarely shared with Daniel. There she could talk without judgment, without feeling invisible. One evening, while commenting on a discussion about classic films, a reply appeared from someone with the username Ethan84. His response was thoughtful, complimenting her taste and asking for her opinion on a film she hadn't thought about in years. Something about the way he wrote felt different, casual but attentive, as though he cared about every word she typed. Over the following days, Claire found herself searching for his messages. Ethan's presence became a constant thread in her evenings. He remembered details she had mentioned casually, like her favorite tea and the fact that she liked thunderstorms. He was curious about her life, but never pushed too hard, never crossing the invisible line that made online conversations feel safe. To Claire, he seemed like a man who listened, truly listened, something Daniel no longer did. Their exchanges shifted from public forum posts to private messages, and soon to late-night chats that stretched into the early hours of the morning. As weeks went by, Ethan became more than just a username. Claire started to imagine the man behind the words. He described himself as a writer who worked from home, someone who enjoyed solitude but longed for genuine connection. His descriptions painted a picture of someone introspective, creative, and gentle, the opposite of the busy, distracted partner she had at home. She never questioned how easily he seemed to fit into her life. Instead, she clung to the comfort he provided, convincing herself that it was harmless, that it filled a void without causing damage. But there were moments when guilt crept in. After closing her laptop, Claire would glance at the empty side of the bed and wonder what Daniel would think if he knew. She told herself it wasn't an affair, not really, because no promises were broken and no physical lines had been crossed. Yet in her heart, she knew she was building a secret world with someone else, a world that pulled her further away from the marriage she was supposed to nurture. Ethan's attention was intoxicating, a steady stream of validation and warmth she hadn't realized she craved. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have imagined in those early conversations, was that Ethan's interest in her life wasn't as simple as affection. He was studying her, learning every detail with an intensity hidden beneath his charm. And while Claire believed she had found a harmless friend in the digital shadows, Ethan was already setting his sights far beyond friendship. Ethan's charm grew stronger with every passing day, and soon he was no longer just a presence in Claire's evenings. He had woven himself into every corner of her thoughts. When she woke in the morning, her first instinct was to check for his messages. When Daniel called from another city to mention he would be late again, her mind drifted to Ethan's words waiting on her screen. He seemed to appear exactly when she needed him, always knowing what to say to keep her from slipping into silence. Claire had convinced herself this was fate, some kind of rare connection in a world full of empty conversation. The more they spoke, the more Ethan steered their discussions toward her personal life. At first, it felt flattering, as if someone truly wanted to understand her world. He asked about her favorite childhood memories, her family, and even her routines. When did she usually wake up? Did she go for walks? Where did she like to shop? Each question seemed harmless, wrapped in the excuse of curiosity, and Claire answered without hesitation. After all, she believed she was speaking to someone who cared about her happiness. His attention filled the gaps Daniel had left, and she felt seen for the first time in years. But beneath the surface, Ethan's questions were deliberate. He asked about Daniel's job and how often he traveled, always disguising it as concern. When Claire admitted that Daniel spent long stretches away from home, Ethan responded with quiet sympathy, insisting she deserved someone who would be there for her. He told her she was too special to be left behind, too valuable to be treated as second best. Those words sank into her heart, reinforcing the cracks already forming in her marriage. She started to believe that maybe Ethan was right, that maybe Daniel's absence was proof of neglect rather than responsibility. Ethan built himself into the role of protector. Whenever Claire hinted at feeling lonely, he told her he wished he could shield her from it. He said she deserved safety and comfort, that he would give anything to take her pain away. The way he described his devotion made Claire feel chosen, as though she had finally found the kind of loyalty she had always longed for. What she didn't notice was how his language slowly shifted, moving from gentle curiosity to subtle possession. He began speaking as though Daniel was not just inattentive but an obstacle keeping her from happiness. To Claire, it was intoxicating to believe someone saw her worth so clearly. She thought she had found a friend who might even become something more when the time was right. She never stopped to consider why a man she had never met in person was so invested in her life, or why he seemed so fixated on the details of Daniel's absences. Ethan's words were carefully chosen, his patience calculated. Each conversation drew her further into a bond that felt unbreakable, but it was not built on love. It was built on strategy, the kind that thrives in silence and secrecy. What Claire saw as kindness was, in reality, a net closing around her. Ethan was not offering comfort. He was collecting pieces of her life, storing them like tools for a plan she could not yet imagine. He wasn't waiting for her to leave Daniel. He was preparing for Daniel to be removed. And Claire, lost in the warmth of attention she had long been denied, had no idea that the perfect stranger she trusted was already reshaping her future in the darkest possible way. The night Daniel died began like any other. Claire sat alone in the living room, the soft glow of the television filling the silence while she scrolled through her phone, waiting for a message from Ethan. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows, carrying with it the chill of winter. Daniel had been away on another work trip, and though Claire was used to his absences, something about that night felt heavier. She didn't know that miles away, Daniel's life was about to end in a way that would shatter everything she thought she knew. It was close to midnight when the knock came at the door. Claire opened it to find 2 police officers standing under the porch light, their faces grim. The words they spoke blurred together, but the meaning was clear. Daniel had been found dead. His car was discovered abandoned on a lonely stretch of road outside the city. At first glance, it looked like a robbery gone wrong. The driver's window had been smashed, and there were signs of a struggle. Yet, strangely, nothing of true value had been taken. His wallet was still in the car, and his watch remained on his wrist. The details made no sense, but grief drowned out Claire's questions. In the days that followed, the news of Daniel's death spread quickly through the town. Neighbors stopped by with flowers, casseroles, and hushed condolences. Claire moved through it all in a fog, unable to process the reality that her husband was gone. At night, when the visitors had left and the house sank into silence, she turned to Ethan. He was her anchor, sending long messages of comfort and reassurance. He told her she was strong, that fate had given her a chance at a new beginning, and that he would always be there to catch her when she fell. His words were a lifeline, and she clung to them. But it wasn't long before Ethan said something that stopped her cold. In one of their conversations, he mentioned the location of Daniel's car, the exact stretch of road where it had been found. Claire froze as she read the message. That detail hadn't been released by police, and she certainly hadn't told him. She tried to brush it off, convincing herself he must have read it online somewhere, but unease crept into her chest. A few days later, he slipped again. While comforting her, Ethan described the way Daniel's injuries must have looked, as though he had been there to see them himself. Claire felt the ground shift beneath her. Until then, she had accepted Ethan as her secret solace, the man who stepped into her loneliness when Daniel could not. Now, a terrifying question began to form in her mind. How did he know so much? She wanted to believe it was coincidence or perhaps a strange mistake, but deep down she sensed the truth pressing against her denial. Still, grief clouded her judgment. She told herself not to jump to conclusions, not to suspect the only person who had been constant since Daniel's death. And yet, no matter how she tried to silence it, the doubt lingered, whispering in the quiet moments. Somewhere inside, Claire knew that Ethan's comfort was not as innocent as it seemed. The tragedy that had torn her world apart might not have been fate at all, but something far more deliberate. The days after Daniel's funeral were heavy with silence. Claire moved through her house as though she were a guest in someone else's life, touching objects that no longer felt like her own. Friends called to check in, neighbors dropped by with sympathy, but she found herself drifting further into isolation. The only person who seemed to cut through the fog was Ethan. His messages came steadily, sometimes dozens a day, filling the hours with the kind of attention she both craved and feared. He spoke as though they were destined to be together, telling her that Daniel's absence was a door opening rather than closing. At first, she let those words soothe her, convincing herself it was harmless comfort. But the unease that had begun when Ethan revealed too much about Daniel's death only deepened. She started to notice patterns in their conversations, things she had missed before. While scrolling through old messages, Claire realized Ethan had been asking about Daniel's travel schedules for weeks, pressing for details in ways she had brushed off as curiosity. He had even asked about the routes Daniel drove, whether he preferred highways or back roads. At the time, she hadn't thought twice. Now those questions seemed sinister, as if he had been mapping Daniel's movements long before tragedy struck. The more she revisited their chats, the clearer the picture became. Ethan hadn't simply been listening. He had been studying all. Every mention of Daniel, every complaint about his absence, every detail about the house or their neighborhood had been filed away under the pretense of compassion. Claire's stomach twisted as she realized she had handed over pieces of her life to a man she had never even seen in person. The line between confidant and predator blurred until it was impossible to ignore. One evening, while rereading a recent message, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Ethan had described the way Daniel's car door had been damaged, down to the shards of glass scattered inside. Claire had only learned that detail when detectives mentioned it briefly during questioning, and she had never repeated it to anyone, not even to her closest friend. There was no way Ethan could have known unless he had been there. The realization settled over her like ice. Panic began to bloom, but she tried to hide it. She responded to Ethan's messages with the same warmth as before, terrified that if she pulled away too quickly, he would notice. At the same time, she began documenting everything, saving screenshots of conversations and writing down the moments that didn't add up. The man she once saw as a lifeline now loomed like a shadow in every corner of her home. Nights grew unbearable. Every time her phone buzzed, Claire felt both relief and dread. She couldn't bring herself to cut him off, but she no longer believed his words of devotion. They were not the words of a man who cared for her. They were the words of someone who had crossed a line so dark she could barely bring herself to admit it. Ethan hadn't just comforted her after Daniel's death. He had orchestrated it. And now she was trapped in the twisted intimacy of a relationship built on violence. Claire's decision to go to the police did not come easily. For days she wrestled with herself, torn between the fear of being wrong and the terror of being right. Ethan's messages had once been a lifeline, but now they felt like chains tightening around her. Each time he wrote to her, she felt the weight of Daniel's death pressing harder, the knowledge that her husband had not been taken by chance, but by the man who claimed to love her. The evidence in her possession, screenshots of Ethan's words, the timestamps that aligned too perfectly with Daniel's final hours, burned in her mind until she could no longer ignore it. She gathered everything quietly, hiding her notes in a drawer and transferring files onto a flash drive. Every click of the mouse made her skin prickle, as though Ethan could see through the screen and sense her betrayal. Finally, with trembling hands, she walked into the police station. The officers listened as she laid out her suspicions, sliding the printouts across the table, her voice breaking as she confessed how she had let this stranger into her life. They didn't dismiss her. Instead, they leaned closer, their faces tightening as they studied the evidence. For the first time, Claire felt she was not alone in carrying the burden. Detectives moved quickly. They traced Ethan's online identity, peeling back the layers of usernames and false details he had fed Claire. What they uncovered was far from the picture he had painted. Ethan was not a lonely writer. He was a man with a record of violence, known for stalking women he met online, shifting from one alias to another whenever suspicion grew too strong. His real name was nothing like the one he had given Claire. His past included restraining orders, police reports, and a trail of broken lives left behind. The most damning discovery came from surveillance footage and cell phone data. Ethan's phone had pinged off towers near the exact stretch of road where Daniel's car was found on the night of the murder. Traffic cameras captured a vehicle matching his registered car driving toward the scene hours before Daniel's death. There was no denying the connection. The pieces fit together too cleanly, painting a picture more horrifying than Claire had ever imagined. Foe.